Hello, my name is Christopher Joll, and if it wasn't for the COVID-19 virus, I'd be standing on a podium in front of you and someone else would be introducing me. However, given that we are where we are, I'm going to have to do that for myself. I'm a former soldier turned military historian. That's me on the left as a young officer in the Life Guards. And more recently, that's me in Sir John Soane's museum, where I was carrying out research for my most recent book, Spoils of War, which is now available on Amazon. So what are spoils of war? Well, from ancient times to the present day, victorious nations have seized and kept treasures, trophies and trivia belonging to their defeated enemies. Such prizes are usually described as the spoils of war, which the dictionary defines as any profits extracted as a result of winning a war or other military activity, including the enslavement and absorption of entire defeated populations. A survey of this subject could legitimately include the enforced exile of the Israelites by the Egyptian pharaohs, or the rape of the Sabine women by Romulus and his randy Romans, albeit that they fought the war with the Sabines after they'd carried off and impregnated their girls. In the interests of propriety, brevity and focus, my book looks only at a selection of those spoils of war and other curiosities acquired by Britain's soldiers, sailors and airmen, which are, for the most part, still available to view, as you can see in the next slide of a spoil of war display in the Cheshire Military Museum. In the course of researching this book, I encountered some unease at the possibility of demands for the repatriation of certain spoils of war. This subject is currently a live issue in the museum world, fueled by, amongst others, ongoing Greek demands for the return of the Parthenon marbles, student activism at Cambridge University that has resulted in the promise by Jesus College to return one of the Benin bronzes to Nigeria, and competing Indian, Pakistani, Afghan and Iranian claims to secure the Kohinoor Diamond. It's the one in the centre of the photo in the bottom right-hand corner, before it was recut. Other claims include that made by a great-grandson of the last king of Burma, who is attempting to find and recover the great Burmese royal ruby known as Naga Mork, last seen in the pocket of the colonial administrator, Colonel Sir Edward Sladen, and pressure from the Chinese government for the repatriation of the contents of the old and new summer palaces, some of which can be seen here on the right at Fontainebleau. Controversially, both the French and the Belgian governments appear to be buckling under such pressure and have decided to return artefacts to post-colonial sub-Saharan Africa, although what will happen to these treasures if they are returned is anyone's guess. In London, the Victoria and Albert Museum has recently returned a lock of hair taken from the dead Emperor Turderos after the siege of Magdala in 1868. That's him on the left. Similarly, the Victoria and Albert Museum, which has a history of returning Abyssinian imperial regalia to Ethiopia, has consented to loan further items, and in 1964 it returned the Mandalay royal regalia, some of which is shown on the right, taken in 1885. But perhaps significantly, the German Chancellor has not requested the return of Hitler's desk, now in a museum in Dorchester, nor has the French President yet demanded the return of the hooves of Napoleon's charger Marengo, one of which is on view at the Household Cavalry Museum. In public life, a selective memory would appear to be the rule when it comes to the subject of spoils of war. My personal view on this much debated topic accords with the excellent academic analysis of the issue of repatriation by Tiffany Jenkins in her seminal work Keeping Their Marbles. This view was also held by the former Prime Minister David Cameron on Indian television in 2010.
The Kohinoor Diamond, are you ever going to return that?
That is a question I've never been asked before.
Well,
but I don't think what tends to happen with these questions is if you say yes to one, you suddenly find the British Museum would be emptied.
Right.
And I know there's also a great argument about the original provenance of the Kohinoor Diamond, and so I think I'm afraid to say to disappoint all the viewers, I'm afraid it's going to have to stay put.
I do not want or need to add to this debate. However, whatever the pros and cons of repatriation, I do want to address the issue of the circumstances under which an acquisition was made and the nature of the object concerned. The concept of "to the victor belongs the spoils" is as old as conflict itself, and in even more recent times has even been defined and regulated by international law. But even before the age of legal regulation, the acquisition of items in the course of warfare was both self-regulated and limited to the battlefield, although on 2 occasions it was state-managed on an industrial scale. The Emperor Napoleon practiced wholesale looting of European works of art during the Napoleonic Wars, as did Hitler, whose Reich Minister Hermann Goering stated, "I intend to plunder and to do it thoroughly," and then proceeded to steal a staggering 25% of the art heritage of occupied Europe, only a fraction of which has been returned, some of it shown here in storage at the end of the Second World War. By contrast, the first Duke of Wellington deplored looting, and there are tales of it driving him into a great rage, as one of his Peninsular veterans noted in a letter home. The primary reason for the Duke's rage was that looting got in the way of fighting. After the Battle of Vittoria in 1813, Wellington came close to ordering the 18th Hussars back to England for plundering King Joseph Bonaparte's baggage train instead of pursuing the French as ordered. That's one of the Hussars in the top right-hand corner. He was also of the opinion that looting was no better than theft. Indeed, Wellington ordered the repatriation of much of Napoleon's European loot after the Allied victory at Waterloo in 1815. It is not, however, a contradiction that the first Duke supported the capture of trophies, such as the French eagles shown here being laid at the feet of the Prince Regent after Waterloo, and the monetisation of spoils of war through prize auctions. The objects covered in my book, which are a small but reasonably representative cross-section of the tens of thousands of such items held in the United Kingdom, fall into the first of 3 of the following 4 broad categories. The first category are battlefield souvenirs, such as the scrap of German trench wallpaper shown here in the top left-hand corner, which are of essentially low intrinsic value. Second category are items acquired at prize auctions or other regulated distributions of spoils of war, some of which, like this Abyssinian crown, may have considerable value. The third category are trophies, including colours and eagles, which were of low intrinsic but high emotional value. And finally, the proceeds of formal treaties, such as the Rock of Gibraltar, the values of which are difficult to calibrate. In the case of battlefield souvenirs, it seems to me that the circumstances surrounding their acquisition are of emotional rather than legal significance. The fact that great-great-uncle Fred seized a dervish spear at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898 and it's now hanging on the wall in his descendants' sitting room, is irrelevant. Its original owner is unknown, and its value is, even at this distance in time and without an interesting provenance, strictly limited. That the brown stain on the blade is probably blood should not alter a rational approach to it as a legitimate spoil of war. A similar approach should be taken to the proceeds of the regulated sale of prizes, some of which may today have significant value. By the standards, mores and rules of the time, the purchase of such spoils was legitimate and legal. For example, the sacking and destruction of the old summer palace in Peking, shown here on the left, in 1860, was a carefully considered act of punishment by Lord Elgin, shown in the top right, and his French counterpart for the appalling atrocities deliberately inflicted on Europeans who were treacherously imprisoned, brutally tortured, and painfully executed on the direct order of the legitimate Chinese government. That, with the benefit of hindsight, it was not a proportionate response to the horrors perpetrated by the Chinese government on British and French citizens is actually irrelevant, and in no way invalidates the subsequent ownership of items acquired by the British and French at that time. The treatment of trophies, such as this capture of a French eagle by the Scots Greys at Waterloo, should be equally unequivocal. The determination to capture an enemy's symbol of national or unit esprit de corps, usually under bloody, violent and life-threatening circumstances, was a central part of warfare from ancient times to the First World War. Their actual capture or loss was almost as important as the outcome of the battle. The idea that in happier times these potent trophies should be returned to their original owners has been consistently rejected, and no shame or embarrassment should attach to their retention. As to the fourth category of spoils of war, those of great value, here I believe the issues as well as the scale are different. The legitimate transfer of objects or territory under the terms of a peace treaty are no less valid because the treaty was signed by the victor and the defeated in circumstances in which there must have been an element of duress, such as the treaties of Tientsin and Versailles illustrated here. To deny the legitimacy of such treaties would be to invalidate all international agreements made at the conclusion of a war, with a resulting chaos in international relations. The fact that history is littered with such incidents does not make repudiation of a treaty term valid. For example, the surrender of the Kohinoor Diamond by the Sikhs was a specific term of the last Treaty of Lahore, illustrated on this slide on the left, which ended the Anglo-Sikh Wars in 1849. Its return, in a hugely altered state, cannot now be demanded on the grounds of duress. So the items described in my book, and thousands more that have not been included, are the proud, legitimate and inalienable property of their present owners. In future videos, I'll be profiling some of them, along with the stories of their acquisition. In the meantime, if you want to know more, you can buy the book in hardback or Kindle format from Amazon. Thank you very much for watching.